Hello everyone, CyberPunk Chris here, back to bring you all another video. This time, we'll be taking a look at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 anime and going over why I think Akaba Leo is the worst villain in all of anime history. I actually wanted to make this video for a couple of years now. Heck, even the thumbnail for this video was something that I made back in 2023, and I finished an Arc 5 rewatch in 2024. However, I have a tendency to be a bit of a procrastinator. I will say though, the one thing that finally inspired me to make this video was the fact that Manga Common, a popular YouTuber, also made his own video on Akaba Leo recently. It reminded me that I had this in my back pocket, so I think it's time I throw my own hat into the ring once more and bring y'all a video I should have made a long time ago. Now you're probably thinking, Chris, maybe you're exaggerating a bit. Surely Akaba Leo can't be the worst villain in anime history. Most people would say it's Kaguya Otsutsuki from the Naruto series, but to be honest, I feel like for as flawed as Kaguya may have been in the eyes of most Naruto fans, I do think she had a lot more going for her. I didn't even mind her in all honesty, because her flaw to me is that she does show up at the end of the series with not much chapters or episodes left, as a sort of twist villain with not as much build up. Whereas Akaba Leo was someone who was present throughout the whole show and did jack shit to cement himself as a good villain. Let me explain. So, Akaba Leo was a major antagonist for the first 126 episodes of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 anime. Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 was the 5th Yu-Gi-Oh! Series and the 4th spin-off after the original series. With the way Arc 5 was structured, it had a lot of expectations to live up to, which Arc 5 failed spectacularly in almost every single facet. One of those expectations were the villains, barring a few in my opinion, such as Yuri, Jean-Michel Roget, and Sora Shiuning. Akaba Leo was the father of the main rival of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, Akaba Reiji. He was known as the professor of Duel Academia in the Fusion Dimension, basically an evil militarized version of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. With someone like that as a villain, you would think that Akaba Leo could play this role well. He did it decently in the first 2 seasons, but I honestly think it's because he showed up so sparingly in them, and he did have a sense of villainous aura around him. I know aura is an overused term, especially nowadays, but I do believe that he had potential to be one of the best villains Yu-Gi-Oh! Has ever had. Once episode 126 came around, though, Leo's main villain role seemed to be quickly taken over by the possible revival of the character named Zarc. Now, this might be a bit hard to follow, especially for those that may not have watched Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5, but I will try my best to explain this train wreck that was the show. Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc 5 had many callbacks to the shows that came before it. One such callback is the fact that the world was split into 4 dimensions, depending on the extra deck summoning methods that were in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game at the time of the show's airing, and which appeared in previous shows and eras of Yu-Gi-Oh! As well, such as the Xyz dimension for Xyz summoning, referencing Yu-Gi-Oh! Zale, the Synchro dimension for Synchro summoning, referencing Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, the Fusion dimension for Fusion summoning, referencing Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, and the Standard dimension, where the main character Yuya Sakaki, main rival Akaba Reiji, and main female lead Hidagi Yuzu are from. To my knowledge, Standard did not represent any particular Yu-Gi-Oh! Show, and for some reason had all of the methods at the time, along with the one that debuted in that era known as Pendulum Summoning. Anyway, the reason the world was split into 4 was because a powerful duelist named Zarc had plunged the original United World into an era of darkness and war. He started out as a regular fun-loving duelist, but over time, his audience grew more and more toxic, demanding that he get more and more hardcore and brutal, resulting in Zarc beating his opponents in gruesome ways and eventually growing strong enough to plunge the original world into the apocalypse. His 4 dragon cards, being the original incarnations of the main character and his counterparts' aces, led the charge and caused lots of death and destruction. Then there was a girl named Rei. Rei was Akaba Leo's daughter, and she saw how Zarc was running rampant. She then stands up to Zarc, uses these 4 spell cards to beat him, and then splits herself, Zarc, and the world into 4. Zarc ended up splitting into the main character Yuya and his counterparts Yuto, Yugo, and Yuri. Rei split into the main female lead Yuzu and her counterparts Ruri, Rin, and Serena. This all happened 14 years prior to the start of Arc 5. Sometime in between those 14 years though, Akaba Leo, who was in Standard for a few years, up and just disappears. Yusho Sakaki, Yuya's father, chases after him but fails to catch him. This caused Yuya to miss out on years with his father due to his mysterious disappearance at the time. Akaba Leo then goes to the Fusion Dimension and opens up Duel Academia. He ends up becoming a fascist military warhawk. Academia commits several war crimes throughout the series, causing a genocide in the Xyz dimension by carding people, trying to do the same thing in Standard, carding a decent chunk of people, but ultimately being thwarted, and he tried to do the same thing again in the Synchro dimension, while also being thwarted. Akaba Leo also had Yuri kidnap Yuzu's counterparts, Rudy and Rin. Then eventually Akaba Leo saw to it that Yuzu and Serena would get kidnapped as well. Then in episode 126, we find out that the reason Akaba Leo does all of this, the reason he commits all of these war crimes, kidnaps these girls, is because he wants to unite the 4 dimensions together once more. And another bonus reason is that he wants to revive his daughter Rei. Now, if you're thinking that sounds counterproductive to Rei's sacrifice from earlier, then you would be correct. This ridiculous scheme of Akaba Leo's was dumb for many reasons. Firstly, it directly squanders the sacrifice of Rei and how she intended to do this as a surefire way that Zarc would never revive. Secondly, the method he used to keep the bracelet girls subjugated was very twisted. So, these girls are the reincarnation of his daughter Rei, and they are put through a very traumatic experience by being mind-controlled by these parasites by this creep of a doctor. Leo hired this man and had him on a payroll to pull this shit. Of course, in 126, Leo sees that the doctor is becoming too greedy for his own good, so he does one of the only useful things he does in the whole show and cards him himself. Granted, this shows that if Leo was not careful, the doctor could have gone after him. This was the only time that Leo beat someone to the punch though. Thirdly, he ends up becoming no different than Zarc because of the atrocities he committed, and he's a total hypocrite. He talks of Zarc being the devil incarnate yet ends up becoming as bad as he is. Fourthly, you know what Einstein over here does? He ends up raising Yuri, one of Zarc's reincarnations, into the second coming of him. He literally raises Yuri, takes him under his wing, and makes him into a literal sociopathic monster. He was injuring people in academia at a young age due to being too rough and was enjoying it. Akaba Leo makes him into this and doesn't once think about either locking him up or steering him onto the right path to at least mitigate Yuri ending up like Zarc. In episode 123, Yuri defeats a character named Asuka and then cards her. He starts getting all demonic, and Akaba Leo has the nerve, the sheer gall, to get all surprised about it when we know that, sir, you made Yuri into this. What surprise even is there? You made Yuri into the monster he was on that day, and the menace he was as a duelist. That blood is on your hands, Leo. If anything, Leo not leaving well enough alone accelerated the process of Zarc reviving immensely and caused it in the first place, because he also has Yuri go into the other dimensions, make contact with the other U-boys, kidnap some of their respective Rei counterparts, Rudy and Rin, and now have Yuto and Yugo, 2 of the U-boys, make direct contact with Yuri, then with each other. Zarc's whole gimmick was reuniting his counterparts into one. Had Leo never done any of this, Zarc would not have even been a problem to deal with. So in other words, the main conflicts of the show are caused by a moron who impulsively made decisions that go against his daughter and any sort of common sense. However, that is not to say that I am not sympathetic. It is very possible that Akaba Leo was driven mad and racked with grief at the fact that he lost Rei. That is one thing I will give Leo. I do think it was sad and tragic that he lost his daughter at the age of 14. He probably never mentally recuperated from that and fell down this dark path. But I don't think it excuses his actions. That was probably the only grace I'm ever going to give this man. What Leo could have done was adopt Serena and called it a day right then and there if you think about it. Would it have been his daughter Rei? No. Nobody could replace her. But Rin was already attached to Yugo, Rudy was attached to Yuto and Kurosaki Shun, the latter being her older brother, and Yuzu was adopted by Shuzo Hiragi. We can assume that Serena was probably alone prior to Akaba Leo pulling up to the Fusion Dimension. That would not have been the most ideal situation for Leo, but it was probably the best case scenario. That way, the Zarc counterparts never make contact with one another, at least not due to Leo's own incompetence, and everybody could have literally lived happily ever after. Except maybe Yuri. However, that's not what ends up happening. What ends up happening is Leo starts an interdimensional war, commits genocide in the Xyz dimension, attempts to do it in standard and in synchro, triggers the U-boys into interacting with one another, and then kidnaps the bracelet girls. Then the worst case scenario does happen. Zarc does revive and once again goes on a damn warpath while Leo is sitting in his damn chair watching as the dimensions merged. Leo sees Zarc on the warpath and tries to deal with him himself. For context, the duel with Zarc was a whole gauntlet, starting with Sora, Shiunin, and Edo Phoenix, two Academia soldiers now fighting on the side of good. They lost, but before they lost, another pair of duelists joined the duel, taking an intrusion penalty of 2,000 life points, as the duel was considered a battle royale. Rinse and repeat for a few episodes. Now we get to Leo's turn to take a crack at Zarc. Now, y'all are gonna laugh at this next part. You know what happens? Leo gets OTK'd on his own turn. Leo brings the 4 cards Ray used to defeat Zarc 14 years prior, and Zarc, being as smart as he is, saw this coming from miles away. He activates a trap card, sends those cards to the graveyard, and defeats Leo swiftly by dealing damage to him in one fell swoop. Leo's credibility tanked to an irredeemably low number. I want to emphasize how bad this is by adding on some context. Shingo Sawatari was a guy who used some pretty good decks. However, the dude does not have a 1v1 win to his name throughout the whole show. He came a hell of a lot closer to defeating Zarc than Akaba Leo, a main villain of the show, ever did. The fact that Leo was OTK'd is insulting enough, but to realize that duelists who are supposed to be weaker than him made more out of their duels with Zarc, given the same handicap, says a lot as to how incompetent Leo is not only as a villain, but as a duelist as well. You're probably thinking, well, we've seen Yu-Gi-Oh! Villains duel each other before and lose. Yes, but in those, you could see there was a hell of a lot of better fights and back and forth than with this duel. Yami Bakura was going toe-to-toe with Yami Merrick up until Raw came out in the OG Yu-Gi-Oh! Series, and in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, Aporia did put up a good fight against Zone, the final boss. Hell, even in Zale, Mizael, one of the villains, puts up a much better fight against the villain Dawn 1000, and that was a very lopsided duel in and of itself. The duel would have ended in a draw. In fact, had it not been for Dawn 1000's hacks but somewhat legal shenanigans, it would have been a draw. All that to say that Akaba Leo was outclassed in every single way, as a duelist and as a villain. Even in the confines of his own show, I find Leo to be easily one of the worst villains, besides the Battle Beast, but he's a whole other can of worms. I think Jean-Michel Roger, the main villain of Season 2, Sora Shiunin, the main villain of Season 1, and Yuri, an overarching villain of the show, were much better in most ways, both dueling-wise and character-wise. Well, dueling-wise for Roger is a bit tricky, but you know what I mean. All in all, Akaba Leo is a representation of Arc 5 as a whole, a very promising idea with very poor execution, a lesson that seemingly haunted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout its whole 25-year run, and continues to do so to this very day.